He cheated, left me broken, and now he's crying for help, begging me to fix what he destroyed. I told him the truth. I'll never feel sorry for you. You made this bed. Now lie in it. The way he reacted when I finally said no is. You can't be serious, I said, my voice a tightrope between incredulity and anger. John leaned against my kitchen counter, his eyes pleading. Come on, Rachel, just think about it. Think about what? The fact that you cheated on me, gave me a disease, and then had the nerve to marry her? He winced at the mention of Kathy's name, and I felt a twinge of satisfaction. It had been 10 years since the divorce, but the wound felt fresh every time I saw his face. It's not about us anymore. It's about the kids, he said, his voice strained. They need both of us. They have me, I replied, my tone cold. And they have you. But they don't need her. John sighed, running a hand through his hair. They're not just my kids, Rachel. They're ours. Our youngest, Mark, had just graduated from high school. He was a bright kid, with a promising future ahead of him. I had raised him and his siblings mostly on my own since the divorce. John had always been more concerned with his new family than with the one he'd abandoned. You made your choices, I said, my voice firm. You don't get to dictate who they invite to their graduation. John's eyes flashed with something that looked a lot like anger. You're being unreasonable. No, John, I'm being protective, I corrected him. They've suffered enough because of your choices. The air in the room grew thick with tension. It was a dance we'd done before, but this time, I wasn't going to let him lead. You're just being spiteful, he said, his voice rising. I'm being honest, I shot back. You and Kathy can deal with your own problems. I won't be a party to them anymore. John's sister, Linda, had always been in my corner. She had been the one to help me through the darkest days of the divorce, but even she had turned on me after my conversation with John. She'd called, her voice trembling, telling me I needed to be more understanding, more compassionate. They've suffered enough, she'd said. You should want them to be happy. But I couldn't get past the way John had looked at me that day in the kitchen, expecting me to fix something that he'd broken, expecting me to make it all better for the woman who'd stolen his heart. Now, as I sat in my quiet living room, the echo of his footsteps on the porch, I wondered if I had gone too far. Had I truly become the spiteful woman Linda accused me of being? Or was I just standing my ground? I knew the answer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'd made a mistake. The phone in my pocket buzzed, and I pulled it out, expecting another text from John. But it was Linda, a single line asking to meet for coffee. I took a deep breath and typed back a curt yes. It was time to hear her out. The cafe was a neutral ground, a place we'd met many times over the years to catch up and discuss our shared love for gardening. She looked at me with a mix of sadness and disappointment as I slid into the booth across from her. Rachel, she began, her voice soft. I know it's hard, but John is really struggling. I raised an eyebrow, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. So now you're his advocate? No, she said, her eyes meeting mine. I'm just trying to understand. He's lost so much, Rachel. And what about what he took from me? I retorted, the anger bubbling up again. Linda sighed, looking down at her coffee. I know, she said finally, but the kids, they're the ones who are really suffering. The truth of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Mark, especially, had become distant since the graduation. He'd always been the most sensitive of the three, and I could see the weight of the family drama on his shoulders. You're right, I conceded, but what do you want me to do? She took a sip of her drink before speaking. Just talk to him, Rachel. For Mark's sake. The cafe's chatter faded into the background as I stared at her. Could I really do that? Fake a truce for the sake of our child? The thought was almost unbearable. But Mark was my priority. If this was what it took to help him move on, I had to consider it. Okay, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But only for Mark. Linda nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. That's all we're asking. As I drove home, my mind raced with the implications of what I'd just agreed to. Would talking to John really make a difference? Could we find some semblance of peace for our kids? The doubt lingered, but so did a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward healing the wounds that had never fully closed. When I walked through the door, Mark was in his room, the door slightly ajar. I could hear the faint strums of his guitar, a sound that had always soothed me. I took a deep breath and knocked gently. He looked up, his eyes red and tired. Hey, I said, sitting on the edge of his bed, how are you doing? Okay, he mumbled, not meeting my gaze. I know this is hard, sweetie, I said, reaching out to touch his hand, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're happy. He looked up at me, his expression a mix of anger and sadness. Do you think I'm happy without Dad at my graduation? The question stung, but I knew it wasn't directed at me. It was the pain of feeling torn between two parents who couldn't get along. I know it's not ideal, I said carefully. But sometimes, we have to make choices that protect us, and I just want you to know that I'm sorry for any pain this has caused you. Mark nodded, his eyes welling up. It's hard. I know, I said, pulling him into a hug, but you're stronger than you think. The next day, I called John. The conversation was tense, but we managed to arrange a meeting. We decided to meet at a park, a place where we wouldn't be tempted to argue or let our emotions get the better of us. As I sat on the bench, watching the kids play, I steeled myself for what was to come. When John arrived, he looked older than the last time I'd seen him. His hair had thinned, and lines etched his forehead. He offered a tentative smile as he sat beside me. "Thank you for coming," he said. "For Mark," I replied, keeping my voice even. He nodded. "I know you think I'm a terrible person, Rachel, but I never wanted to hurt you or the kids." "Maybe not," I said, "but you did." "I know," he said, his eyes downcast, "and I'm sorry." For a moment the weight of his apology hung between us, unspoken. Then he looked up at me, his eyes earnest. "What do you want from me?" I took a deep breath. "I want you to leave us alone," I said, "but if Mark decides he wants to see you, I won't stand in the way." John nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The air felt lighter as we watched the kids play, the tension slowly easing from my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't friendship, but it was a start. For Mark's sake, we could be civil. For Mark's sake, we could pretend we weren't still fighting the battles of our past. As we left the park, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It wasn't the ending I'd ever wanted for our family, but it was a new chapter. And maybe, just maybe, it was one where we could finally start to move on. John and I agreed to keep our interactions to a minimum, only speaking when necessary for the kids. It was a fragile peace, but it was something. Over the next few months, Mark started to come around. He agreed to go to his dad's house for dinner once a week, and I even allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope when John called to ask about Mark's day or to wish him happy birthday. But it was during one of these dinners that everything unraveled. Mark had gone to John's for the evening, and I was home alone with a quiet house and too much time to think. The phone rang, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw it was John. "What's wrong?" I answered, my voice tight with fear. "It's Kathy," he said, his voice shaking. "She had a breakdown." I felt a mix of emotions, concern, anger, and a strange sense of déjà vu. "What happened?" "She found out I was still in contact with you," he said, his voice low. "It's all just too much for her." I sighed, my hand tightening on the phone. "John, she needs to understand that we have to co-parent." "I know," he said, "but she's just so insecure, Rachel. She can't handle it." And there it was, the same old pattern. John, always trying to fix Kathy's problems, always putting her needs first. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firm, "but I won't be the one to make her feel better about this." "You don't have to," he said quickly. "I just thought you should know." "Well, I do," I said, my voice cold, "and if she can't handle it, then maybe she shouldn't be around our kids." The line went silent for a moment before John spoke again. "We're just trying to move on, Rachel." "So am I," I replied, my voice steely. "And if you can't respect that, then maybe we shouldn't be talking at all." I hung up the phone, my heart racing. The anger was back, hot and heavy in my chest. How could he still expect me to be the one to fix this? To make it okay for the woman who'd torn apart our family? The next morning, Mark came to me, his eyes red and puffy from crying. "I don't want to go to Dad's anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't like it when they fight." And just like that, the decision was made. I couldn't force my son to be a pawn in their twisted game anymore. It was time to draw a line in the sand. "Okay," I said, wrapping him in a hug. "You don't have to go if you don't want to." The relief on his face was palpable. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. And with that, I knew what I had to do. I picked up the phone and called John, my voice steady. "We need to talk," I said. "It's about our co-parenting agreement." When we met at the lawyer's office a week later, the tension was palpable. But I was ready. I had my kids' best interests at heart, and I wasn't going to let Kathy's inability to deal with the past ruin their future. "We need to establish clear boundaries," I said, my voice calm. "For the sake of our children." John nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said. "Just be better." The lawyer drafted up the new agreement, and we both signed it without protest. It was a clear message. No more drama, no more manipulation. We would put the kids first. As we left the office, John turned to me, his eyes searching my face. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," I said. "Thank Mark. He's the one who taught us that sometimes, The only way to move forward is to leave the past behind. He nodded again, and this time, I believed him. Maybe, just maybe, we could finally start to build a new kind of relationship. Not as husband and wife, but as parents who both loved their children fiercely and wanted the best for them. But as we walked out into the sunlit afternoon, I knew that the real challenge was still ahead. Kathy. How would she react to this newfound peace between us? Would she accept the boundaries or would she try to push past them, eager to claim the family she'd always wanted? The next few weeks were tense. I could feel the storm brewing, but I held firm to my resolve. Mark's well-being was what mattered most, and if that meant cutting John and Kathy out of our lives completely, then so be it. Then, one evening, I received a text from Kathy. It was short and to the point. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. What could she possibly want to say to me? But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her for coffee. The cafe was the same one where John and I had met to discuss Mark. It felt like a lifetime ago. As Kathy approached the table, I steeled myself for the worst. But she looked different. Her eyes were no longer filled with the spite and malice I'd come to expect from her. Instead, she looked tired, defeated. "I know I haven't been the best stepmother," she began, her voice trembling. "And I know I've made a mess of things." I raised an eyebrow, not quite sure where this was going. "What do you want, Kathy?" She took a deep breath. "I want to try to be better," she said. "For the kids." The words hung in the air, and I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice wary. "It means I won't interfere," she said, looking up at me with something that almost looked like sincerity. "I'll respect your boundaries. I can't lose John. And if this is what it takes to keep our family together, then I'll do it." For a moment, I felt a pang of pity for her. She'd lost so much, and now she was facing the possibility of losing the man she'd stolen from me. But then I remembered the years of pain she'd caused, and I knew that pity had no place here. "You won't get a second chance with me," I said, my voice firm. "But if you can truly put the kids first, then maybe we can find a way to coexist." It was a tentative peace, one built on the shaky foundation of mutual distrust and resentment. But for Mark's sake, for the sake of our fractured family, it was a start. Over the next few months, Kathy did seem to make an effort. She didn't push to be included in every family event, and she even started to treat me with a begrudging respect. John was more present in the kids' lives, and the tension between us began to ease. But every time the phone rang with John on the other end, my heart would skip a beat. Would this be the moment when it all fell apart again? Would Kathy find some new way to insert herself into our lives and cause more pain? And yet, every time, John would simply ask how the kids were doing, or tell me about some funny thing Mark had said. It was as if we were slowly rebuilding the shattered pieces of our past, one conversation at a time. I never forgot the hurt he'd caused, and I doubted I ever truly would. But as the months turned into years, and the kids grew into adults with families of their own, I found myself looking at John and Kathy with something akin to understanding. We weren't friends. We never would be. But we were parents who had made mistakes and were now doing our best to fix them. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The day Mark called to tell us he was expecting a baby, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Joy, of course, but also fear. Would Kathy try to weasel her way into being the grandmother she'd always wanted to be? Would John put her needs before those of his own child? But when Mark told us, John's face lit up with pure happiness. He turned to me, a look of hope in his eyes. Could we, maybe, try to be there for him? It was the first time he'd asked for anything that didn't feel manipulative. And for Mark's sake, I agreed. We would support him, together, as the grandparents he deserved. The months leading up to the baby's arrival were filled with tension. Kathy made it clear she wanted to be involved, and while I kept my distance, John did his best to balance her needs with those of our children. It wasn't easy, but we managed. Then the day came. Mark's little girl, Emma, was born. She was perfect in every way, and the moment I held her, all the anger and resentment melted away. This little life was pure, untouched by the mess we'd made. John and I stood outside the hospital room, watching through the glass as Mark held his daughter. He looked so much like him, and yet, so much like me. And in that moment, I knew we had to put aside our differences for her. "I'm sorry," John said, his voice hoarse, "for everything." I turned to him, surprised by his words. "We can't change the past," I said, "but we can try to make the future better." He nodded, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "For Mark," he said, "for all of us." And with that, we stepped into the room as a united front, the three of us, standing together, watching as a new chapter in our lives began. Over the years, we found a way to coexist. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of bumps in the road. But for the sake of our grandkids, we learned to be civil, even friendly. We attended their birthdays, their school plays, and their graduations. Kathy never did become the mother figure she so desperately craved, but she found some semblance of peace in being a part of their lives, and for that, I was grateful. As I watched Mark hold his own baby girl, I couldn't help but think of all we'd been through. The love and pain, the anger and forgiveness. It was a journey I never wanted to take, but one that had brought us to this place of understanding. Our family was forever changed by John's betrayal, but we had found a way to move on. Not as the perfect family we once were, but as something new, something that had grown out of the ashes of what we'd lost. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. As we watched Mark cradle little Emma, I felt a strange sense of, not closure, but acceptance. This was our reality now. And as long as John and Kathy were willing to play their parts without causing more harm, we could all find a way to coexist. The years passed quickly, with the grandkids growing up in a whirlwind of love and laughter. They brought joy to our lives in a way that nothing else could, and I was grateful for every moment I had with them. But it was always there, in the back of my mind, the fear that Kathy would try to claim more than she was entitled to, that she would find some way to worm her way back into the heart of the family she'd so desperately wanted. Then one day, it happened. Mark called me, his voice shaking with anger. "They're trying to take her away from me," he said, the words barely coherent. "John and Kathy are saying I'm not a good father, that they should have custody." I felt the world drop out from under me. How could they do this to him? To us? But as much as I wanted to rush in and save the day, I knew it was Mark's fight. "What do you need from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to support me," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't do this alone." So, we went to court, the three of us, me, Mark, and his wife, Jenna. We faced John and Kathy with their team of lawyers, and we told the truth. We showed the judge what kind of people they really were, and how much they had hurt us. The hearing was grueling, a battle of words and accusations. But in the end, the judge saw through their lies. He granted Mark full custody, with John and Kathy receiving limited visitation. It was a victory, but it came at a cost. Our relationship with John was strained to the breaking point, and Kathy, she was a snake in the grass, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. But Mark was safe, and that was all that mattered. The years passed, and we grew apart from John and Kathy. The kids saw them rarely, and even when they did, the tension was palpable. But we had our little family, the one we'd built together, and it was filled with love and warmth. And then, the unthinkable happened. John got sick, cancer, the doctors said. He didn't have long. Mark called me, his voice thick with pain and fear. "What do we do?" he asked. I took a deep breath, looking out the window at the world that had changed so much since that fateful day I'd found out about the affair. "We go see him," I said. "For the kids, for closure." So we did. We stood by John's bedside, watching the life drain from his eyes. And even though the anger was still there, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. He was the father of my children, after all. As he took his last breath, Kathy turned to me, her eyes wet with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being here." I nodded, unable to find the words. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to simply show up. After John's funeral, Kathy disappeared from our lives. The kids had grown into adults with families of their own, and they had enough drama to deal with without her in the mix. I hoped she'd found peace, or at least some semblance of it. But as I held my granddaughter, the woman I never wanted to be a mother, I couldn't help but wonder what could have been. What if John had never strayed? Would we be a happy family, sharing holidays and birthdays without the shadow of his infidelity hanging over us? The truth was, we'd never know. All we could do was to keep moving forward, to love the family we had, and to make sure that no matter what, we were there for each other. And in the end, maybe that was the best kind of victory of all.